and welcome to the Mariah Gene Fit YouTube channel. I'm Coach Mariah. Make sure you like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos as much as possible so we can reach a broader audience. We appreciate your support and enjoy the video. Hello and welcome to another vlog and podcast by Mariah Gene Fit. Coach Mariah here and the Fit Minds podcast. So if you've landed on this video, we're going to discuss some fitness and food myths today, busting some myths about some of the most common fad diets, fad trends that you see in the industry, and for some reason people keep talking about them as if they work. So I'm going to very quickly address them today because it doesn't actually need to be given too much time to tell people that these do not have enough evidence, scientific evidence to back them. And myself as a practitioner, somebody who's qualified, registered, insured in sports nutrition as an accredited sports nutritionist, now studying performance sports nutrition with the IAPN. I previously studied with Sports Nutrition Australia and I am registered and insured with them as a body. So of sports nutritionists in Australia, we are the only ones that are qualified to do meal planning and macronutrient breakdowns for clients, mostly general population, and obviously anybody who has sort of chronic conditions. We need to have clearance from their specialists and GPs to proceed. So just so you know, I do have the qualifications to back what I am saying in this video, and it has come from my education. So first of all, going to start off with listing the major trends and the like that seem to be circulating through and haven't quite made their way out of the trending fitness and food regimes. First of all, keto is one of the most obvious ones, which I'm going to touch on. The 1200 calorie diet, dropping your calories as low as possible to drop body fat. Things like waist trainers, fat burning supplements. Also, lemon water recently made its very quick rounds through things like TikTok. There was lemon water. Salted water as well was a really big part of that trend as well. There was salted water and lemon water kind of simultaneously. Things like celery, the celery juice diet, and the list goes on. In fact, there probably are too many to name for me to get through all of them. Fasted cardio and intermittent fasting is another one that I will touch on. There will be more, even for example, people going vegan and vegetarian, not for the purpose of moral reasons, but from a standpoint of that it is better for them, for their digestion, etc., etc. There's just not enough evidence to support this, and there's actually plenty of evidence from a scholarly level to support the idea that these diets and these fads and these trends can actually be quite detrimental for your health, not just your physical, but also your mental health. So we're going to start off with keto. So we're going to debunk this. Now, I'm going to keep this in layman's terms as much as possible. I don't really believe in becoming too scientific when it comes to these topics. The only reason why is because, when we're talking about it as professionals, if I was talking to other sports nutritionists, it makes a whole lot of sense to talk science. Whereas for you guys out there, you want to know why it doesn't work in a very basic way so that you don't go near it. So you don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. So we're going to start off with keto. Keto kind of, I guess, came into the fitness and the nutrition world as quickly as the diet, such as the Atkins diet. There was like a 5-in-1. I don't even know what the numbers are that they use for this, but there's been these very quick, short-lived. You see that they probably last about maybe at the most, maybe 2 to 3 years. And they all have a name, and they all seem to be something that people who are quite gullible or even easily influenced will take up quite quickly. It's kind of like if something is shoved in your face enough, eventually it's kind of like an advertisement. You will listen. If it's everywhere, how can you not listen? So origins of keto, the keto diet, ketogenic diet, basically the description of this is that you consume a high-fat diet whereby you basically eliminate all forms of carbohydrates or as many as possible. Now that's near impossible because there are a lot of fats out there, so high-fat diets that actually contain carbohydrates as well. So it's near impossible to cut carbs out entirely. And still keeping protein intake in there as well, but just obviously this high-fat diet. Now, the ketogenic diet came about by mistake. It was originally something that researchers were playing around with to treat brain conditions, things like epilepsy and things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, to see if they could try and almost slow down the brain process and like stop the kind of spasms and things that were happening for people. You know, I don't know the actual details of this on a finer level, but I do know that it was originally basically found by mistake. So they did some research and they cut the carbohydrates down for these particular patients, for people who are struggling with Parkinson's, for people who are struggling with epilepsy and brain and neural conditions. So these were conditions of the brain, right? And we know that carbohydrates and glycogen is incredibly powerful for brain thought and for, you know, just as simple as functioning throughout the day, being able to think deeply and to process thought patterns. You require glycogen. And they've actually done studies, and this is throughout, you know, quite a few business books that I read even myself, that we have a lapse in concentration as the day goes on because of the lack of food to the brain and carbohydrates basically. And that's where we can start to get the fuzzies at certain parts of the day. It's when we actually need to refeed and actually eat again to fuel the brain. Now, the brain loves carbs, okay? The brain loves carbs. Have you ever noticed that if you try to cut carbs, all of a sudden your thinking goes really fuzzy and you're not quite sure what you did 30 seconds ago? This is because it is very difficult for the body to break down fats as a source of energy, meaning that it doesn't really preference them unless you're sedentary and sitting down all day. But in that case, you're not really burning much energy anyway. You're not really moving around very much. And for things like deep thought process, carbohydrates are essential. You do need them to think clear and to think straight. We know that. We know that after you've had some bread, you feel yourself again. You're not you because you haven't had a Snickers. So where along the lines of this keto turned into something that was like this, you know, it basically took over the internet. We saw that keto, and it still is, seems to be circling around, but it's kind of like a cult. It started off as a massive, you know, culture, and it's slowly, and that's, you know, what cult is short for is it's slowly starting to die down now, and people are starting to realize how ridiculous keto is. However, there are still some very easily influenced people out there who are looking for quick fixes to lose body fat, and they look to keto. They think to themselves, this is going to be easy. I'll just cut out carbs, you know, I'll just eat a really high fat diet. Now, there's a few issues with why we shouldn't, and I will never recommend doing keto for anybody, in that unless you've got a chronic condition whereby they're going to see some sort of benefit for you know, a brain, you know, issue that you've got going on, where maybe reducing your carbohydrates might help out, maybe, there's no point in doing this. There's absolutely no point in doing this. Most of the results that people experience from ketogenic diets in the beginning is going to be a combination of water loss and glycogen loss. And water loss will come from the fact that because they've just cut out a giant food group, right? If you imagine cutting out, let's say, something that you eat every single day at the moment, let's just say you cut that out, right? You're actually cutting out a particular amount of calories that you would have been consuming previously, and now you're just eating, you know, the things that you were eating before, maybe slightly different amounts. But you're cutting out a huge food group. And by doing that, you're cutting out a huge amount of energy, yes, that you would have been consuming previously. But that creates a calorie deficit. Sure, it can do in some instances, but you can still create that calorie deficit without completely cutting out an entire food group. And when we talk about food groups, we're talking about macronutrients: protein, fats, and carbs. They're the three major macronutrients. There is alcohol as well, but that's a whole nother kettle of fish. And in some countries, they consider water to be a macronutrient, but it holds 0 calories. So let's stick to the protein, fats, and carbs. Protein is something that helps you with muscle protein synthesis, whereby you can repair muscle, and on a daily basis, you do require a minimum protein intake for you to basically repair the muscles that you're using. Even if you're not necessarily doing very much, the body does it to regenerate the cells of the muscle tissue. So we actually use protein every day. It also helps keep us fuller for longer. It's the most satiating macronutrient group, and the things that consist of protein, or the ingredients you'd be using, would be things like chicken breast, egg whites. Eggs do contain protein and some fats as well, and things like white fish, lean meat, protein powder, and the list goes on, even high protein yogurt as well. So we do require protein. Very rare percentage of population, and I'm talking like a very rare percentage of the population, will have an intolerance to protein or in high levels. And that's usually something that's a very rare condition. So most people, 99.999% of the population, will need to consume large amounts of protein to get essential amino acids. And this is basically something we've discovered over the years that is essential to human survival and to avoid disease, okay, long term, and death eventually, right? So scary, eat your protein or you will die. Joking, you won't, but it is very essential for, especially if you're doing resistance training, for muscle repair and for muscle growth. Now, you're looking at the second macronutrient, carbohydrates. Now, this one gets a really bad rap, and for some reason over the years it has gotten an awful rap because there's a lot of different food types that get lumped into the carbohydrate group. And you're looking at everything from fruit to simple sugars, honey, added sugar. There are lots of preservatives that are basically just other words for sugar and the like. So you can see that sugar can get a bad rap because it's just such a large, carbohydrates can get a bad rap because it's such a large umbrella to cover so many different types of carbohydrates. There's rice, there's bread, there's potato. Now, basically there's also in this, there's starches, there's white starches, there's, leafy vegetables, you name it. Like there are so many things that can be lumped into a carbohydrate group. So obviously, over the years, we've found out that there is a maximum amount of processed sugar that we should be consuming daily, or sugar in general that we should be consuming daily as per the recommendations and guidelines that we've been given from pretty much worldwide nutrition standards. It differs slightly from country to country, but there is a recommendation. Now, that doesn't mean cutting it down to nothing. When we have a recommendation, it literally is a guideline and a recommendation which is very general across the population. And these have been calculated values based on numerous, very diverse studies to get there. And they're still studying this type of subject today. So it's something that when we do have things like RDIs, recommended daily intake for Australia, these are something that we should take very seriously because it's something that people who are quite qualified and well-versed in this type of topic are basically dedicating their entire life study to. So now we've got fats. Now, fats also can get a bad rap in some instances because you're looking at things like saturated fats, so deep fried foods, you're looking at hydrogenized oils as well, so lots of processed fats that came about in the era of takeaway. And fats can pretty much be hidden in lots and lots of different things, like sugar from a carbohydrate can be as well. Now, with fats, there are some very healthy fats, and we call them healthy fats because plant-based fats are fantastic for your general health and hormone production, and there are a list of benefits that range from things like your digestive health to your skin quality to the absorption of other vitamins and minerals that fats are super handy for. So they are basically a regulator in that they do their job, they have a job, but at a specific intake. And this specific intake is recommended between 25 and 30% of your total daily intake, depending on your energy levels. Now, your energy expenditure levels, really. Now, you'd be wanting to have a lesser amount of fats, around the 25% intake, if you are engaging in athletic level sports and training and high heart rate training, and you're moving around all day and you've got really high steps. Your fats you're not going to want them to be very high. And the reason why is because when we are highly active, guess which fuel source the body likes to use more of? Carbohydrates. It wants to access carbohydrates a little bit more than what it does fats. If we're always in low heart rate zones, it probably is going to predominantly use more fats, yes, and it can burn our own body fat as well, lipids, but it can only do that. It can only access fats. Right? It can only access body fat if we're in a calorie deficit. So what does a calorie deficit mean, and why do we keep having this term thrown around all the time? Well, it's not a fad diet. Being in a calorie deficit is simply figuring out how many calories you are expending, so how much energy you're expending for the day, and there is a measurement of that. Now, we can figure that out with a multitude of things like your age, your weight, your height. We figure that out as sports nutritionists for you, and that will still differ based on things like genetics. There's going to be some other factors in there like your total energy expenditure for the day that is non-exercise activity. So that's basically moving your hands around and just twitching and the like, and even walking because it's low heart rate. So there's lots of factors that basically decide what your calorie deficit is. And the interesting thing is, it's different for every single person. There will be people who will share the same calorie deficit at given points in time in their life. And that's based on a calculation that perhaps it might be that There is a male and a female, and one might be taller and heavier than the other, and the other one might be, yes, weigh a little bit less and shorter. They might be a different age, but for some reason their energy expenditure seems to be almost the same. It's very rare that this will happen across male and female and such varying and different variables and the like of, their lifestyle factors and their genetics and everything that has a say in this type of thing. But generally, a calorie deficit will actually be a range. And so we can have an extreme calorie deficit, and that will lead me to my next point when we talk about 1200 calories. We can have an extreme calorie deficit, which is basically the end of the calorie deficit for a person that is almost too low for them to be eating and not enough calories for them to get by for the day. And that can actually see that they get quite hungry quite quickly and they lose their energy. And they also can have what's called metabolic adaptation occur pretty quickly as well. And this is whereby you run out of room to play with. Basically, if you cut someone's calories down too low, too quickly, the body has a way of adapting and adjusting to that level of calories. It's basically a survival technique that's built into us whereby our heart rate says, you know what, and this is not in scientific terms, you know what, I don't want to deal with this low level of intake. I'm going to slow down a little bit to cope with the idea that you're not going to feed me enough. And if you think about it, if we were out in the wild trying to survive, if we didn't have enough food for weeks on end, eventually our body has to have some sort of inbuilt mechanism to cope and survive. And the slowing the heart rate down is a part of that. So generally, without going down a rabbit hole with metabolic adaptation, you'll find that if people are in a calorie deficit and they've gone too far with the calorie deficit, like the 1200 calorie diet, they get stuck and they're like, hold on, why am I not dropping weight? Why am I not dropping body fat? Now, there is a lot of stuff on the internet at the moment stating things like, well, you're probably not eating 1200 calories. In some instances, correct. They may not be tracking their calories. They may be doing false entries, whatever it might be. They may be telling themselves they're eating 1200 and then snacking behind closed doors above that. But let's assume the person is actually consuming 1200 calories and they've been doing that for quite some time, and all of a sudden they think, I'm not losing any body fat. I'm not talking about weight. They're not losing any body fat. This is where metabolic adaptation comes in. So basically, this is why the 1200 calorie diet doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's no longevity in it, and there's only so long a human being can survive on 1200 calories for until you want to eat the entire house. There is a way to effectively drop body fat while being in a calorie deficit that still works, doesn't put as much stress on the body, and gives you room to move with when you need to reduce the calories when your metabolic rate, how much energy you burn, changes. Now that will change when you drop weight, because when you weigh less, you burn less. And it doesn't probably make very much sense for most people. Well, that's not very fair. The more I drop, the less I burn. Yes, that is the case. Somebody who would weigh 110 kilos will most likely burn more than a person who weighs 50 kilos just standing there and breathing, depending on a few factors. But the cool thing is, if you increase your muscle mass, if you actually increase this stuff here, the lean muscle mass, you can also increase your metabolic rate. Not by large amounts, but enough to know that it's substantial. So basically, it's ideal if you're trying to drop body fat to know that you're in a calorie deficit, to not go to an extreme calorie deficit because it doesn't work for very long, and you get sick of it pretty quickly, and you get very hungry, and you run out of energy very quickly, and your body will adapt. So you've got no room to go when you want to drop more body fat. And it's really bad for you. At that point where you reach 1200 calories, especially if you've been dieting for quite some time, you're looking at things like being malnourished. Now, when we are malnourished, we don't have enough micronutrients, we're not getting enough of that good stuff, and we're probably not getting enough macronutrients either. And that's where we start to see the onset of things like people getting sick, chronic disease, etc., etc. So, going back to the keto diet, the balance of fats being at a particular intake has actually come from university level studies whereby pretty much every single country has agreed upon the intake of the ideal adequate amount of fats for a person's diet, and they do not recommend more than 30% consumption of their total daily intake. Now, this would basically mean that the keto diet is a load of shit, because we know that the high-fat diet would call for much more than 30% of the daily intake for you to adhere to a ketogenic diet. So if we're looking at eating these high levels of fats, what happens to the body when we overconsume fats, and specifically when we overconsume saturated fats. Now, this is a particular type of fat that can be found in things like animal fats, the gristle of your meat, etc., and some hydrogenized oils as well. So a lot of oils that are used to deep fry things like chips. Sometimes meat you'll see is deep fried in takeaway foods. Sometimes it's just added to things to make it taste better, because we know that fats do make things taste better. So you're going to see a lot in takeaway foods, and in packeted foods you will see some of these oils as well. Now, there's lots of different names for them, so they're very hard to actually spot. But if you look on the back of a packet, it'll actually tell you what the saturated fat intake is of that particular item and how much of a percentage of your daily intake it takes up. The unfortunate thing is a lot of takeaway foods don't have this. They don't actually have this. They won't have how much of the fat intake is, that the saturated fats is taking up. So basically, you may be over-consuming your fats already as it is, and most of the population, honestly, is already doing that, especially the Western population. So specific to, places like Australia, America, the UK, and this is why we have, and it's part of the contributing factor towards issues with obesity, is that a lot of these takeaway foods, a lot of the convenience foods, and also this sedentary lifestyle is looking at the overconsumption of fats and the overconsumption of calories in general. Now, the reason why I would never recommend keto, and one of my biggest reasons why I would justify it, is that with this high level of fat intake, fats are an incredibly dense, calorically dense, so there's a lot of calories in fats as a macronutrient. There's actually 9 calories per gram. Now, if you look at carbohydrates and protein, they've got 4 calories per gram of each one of those macronutrients. It's very easy to overconsume fats. If you look at something like a tablespoon of peanut butter, it's about 100 to 110 calories, versus you can literally, pick up a piece of bread, and this will just be a normal piece of bread, not a low carb, not a low calorie piece of bread, and you've got a piece of bread next to it and this tablespoon of peanut butter. Now, if you were to look at them like for like, the space that they take up in your hand, it's very much guaranteed the peanut butter takes up less space and the piece of bread takes up more space, but they've got the same caloric value. So fats in general as a macronutrient group, if you're going to try and consume a high fat diet, you're probably going to end up consuming an excess of calories eventually, over-consuming your fats and putting yourself into a state where your body actually starts to store these fats on things like your organs and doesn't really know what to do with things like excessive trans fats and saturated fats. And so that's where you can see the start of things like cholesterol issues and heart conditions and things like high blood pressure as well. Now, high blood pressure can be exacerbated by the overconsumption of salt, but only if salt isn't being used and if it's in conjunction with the consumption of this high-fat diet. So, have I scared the crap out of you just yet not to try keto? Probably, I would hope so. And also, my last point on keto, not to try keto, one of my major reasons for this is you don't get to eat any of the fun foods you like anymore. There's no ice cream, there's no bread, there's no rice. Oh my God, that would be hell, right? I eat chocolate, I eat bread every day. There's no chocolate. You can't have anything that has the slightest amount of carbohydrates in it if you decide to go and do keto. So, how do you think that this is going to be something that you're going to sustain for the rest of your life? A lot of these fad diets and these trends, you've got to look at this, right? If you're going to use this for a temporary measure to lose body fat, it's basic math to understand that if you stop doing that, you will go back to doing what you were doing before, overeating your calories perhaps, and that old lifestyle that you had, and everything's going to come back on again. How many of you have yo-yoed? How many have you taken on this diet, or you've started this lemon water trend, or you've started this trend and you've gone, I hate this, I'm not doing this for the rest of my life, this sucks, it's not doing anything, or it's done something and then it stopped doing something, and I hate the way that I don't get to eat the things I enjoy. Crap. I'm going to stop this and I'm going to start eating the things I ate before at exactly the same levels. Why is all the body fat coming on? I did all the hard work. The issue is that these diets are not sustainable. The first thing you should be looking at if you are engaging in something that is going to change your life and change your physique and change your health is this something, this type of, this way of eating, something I could do for the rest of my life. Not necessarily the amount of calories that you're eating, right? Because if you're in a calorie deficit, you don't have to stay in one forever. Once you've hit your goals, you can increase your food back up. Not as much as it was before maybe, but You can, obviously, with the education you have, do that, right? So if it's not sustainable and it's not something that you're going to do past the 8 or 10 week challenge you've signed up for, or the gym you've signed up for, and they put you on this ridiculous diet of spinach and avocado and chicken for 8 weeks, if that's not something that you can feed your family, why are you doing it? Because it's not a long-term solution. Temporary solutions is like putting a band-aid on a dent in a car. So keto's gone, 1200 calorie diet. I pretty much explained this before in conjunction with the keto style, is that we know that when people start keto, they see fat loss, maybe because they've got themselves into a deficit, all right? And also if they've lost the glycogen stores, which we do store a little bit of weight. It's not body fat, it's weight from excess glycogen, which is basically carbohydrates that we haven't used as energy yet. And it's interesting, it's our body's little inbuilt system to saying, I'll take that and I'll use it later. We don't have that for anything else except carbohydrates. In fact, we can convert other macros to an energy source, but we're more likely to have the carbohydrates stored in our body as glycogen. And this is really exciting because our body can utilize this later. So it does have to weigh something though. Carbohydrates also require a certain amount of water to sit underneath the skin. It's where it sits as the glycogen stores ready to be used. It's kind of like putting fuel in the tank and not driving off with it. We still have it there to use for later. So generally it's around 500 grams. It really can be up to 900 grams as well. I mean, there's case studies where people have literally dropped 1.5 kilos or 2 kilos because they've reduced their carbohydrate intake down. But we're looking at water intake and we're looking at, carbohydrates, because the carbs need the water to be held under the skin, and the carbs have to weigh something to sit underneath the skin, right? Now, when we have an excess of fats in the body, they're more likely to be stored as body fat, and the same goes for protein. However, they actually can be converted into energy if we've run out of carbohydrates, and also if we're not in those higher heart rate zones as well. So it gets a little bit complicated without getting too sciencey. But basically, there is a recommendation, and this is where I'm going to come to. There's a recommendation for how much protein, how much fats in the way of grams when you're tracking your food, and how many carbohydrates that you should be consuming for your goals. Now, you're probably asking, how the hell do I work those out? Well, you can get onto a sports nutritionist like myself. There are plenty of sports nutritionists out there. You can get onto a dietitian who can help you out with that. You can probably even find out on the internet, but these calculators that are on the internet are not that accurate. So just be careful if you do go looking on the internet. I don't recommend it. But sports nutritionists and dietitians, this is our job, and this is what we're actually legally qualified and insured to do. So 1200 calorie diet, we know that doesn't work because we know that for each individual person, there's a particular intake that is the sweet spot for you, for your calorie deficit. And this means that you could probably eat more food than 1200 calories to lose body fat at your optimum level, where you won't be losing muscle as well if you eat enough protein, you're eating the right macronutrient groups, and where you're not going to, feel like absolute crap because you've had to cut out the food groups that you don't want to cut out. So 1200 calorie diet, boom, out, get out. No 1200 calorie diet. There would be very rare cases and scenarios where someone will be put on 1200 calories. It might be in the instance where someone has been put into, the final stages of a competition prep and they just don't weigh that much. But honestly, 1200 calories is actually the minimum amount of food required for an adult to breathe, let alone function for a day. And I'm talking even a child to adult, that's where it came from. And a lot of doctors used to put people on 1200 calorie diets because it was easy for them to do that. However, we have to remember that GPs, they don't actually do extensive study into nutrition and to things like calorie intake. That's why sports nutritionists and dietitians exist. They should be referring you to one for your specific requirements and needs. So that brings me to my next point about food restriction. Now, food group restriction, it pretty much goes on par with things like keto, basically things like cutting carbs out, things like, I'm going to cut my fats out. I'm going to have particularly low levels of fats. I've seen some people consuming below what's recommended for them. I've seen some people saying, I want to go vegan and I don't want to eat protein or any sort of animal meat because I think it's really bad for me. And because there's going to be an opinion on everything on the internet, right? You will literally be able to find something supporting some sort of strange, crazy idea on the internet. So if you go looking, you'll probably find something supporting the idea that cutting out food groups is going to be great for you. The problem is that there are people who've already done these studies, and they are nutritionists and they are dietitians. These are people with qualifications. You should be listening to them. And I'm not talking about the guy who wrote a blog who got his dietetic studies, he got his qualification 20 years ago. We're talking about people who are well-versed and up to speed with really current nutrition practice and protocol. So if you're worried about that, you can have a look at nutrition registries and dietitian registries. There are some for Australia and in other countries. And this is where you're going to see a lot of the very up and coming and, as I said, well-versed professionals in these fields. And I would like to consider myself one of them. I still have a lot to learn. That's why I'm studying a little bit more at the moment. But this is what we do. This is our jobs. We do this so that we can help you do this for the rest of your life. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to make a living out of this. So, always trust a professional. If you are listening to someone like a PT or a coach at a gym who does not have any sort of formal nutrition qualifications, the easiest way is to ask them, hey, what are your nutrition qualifications? Who are you insured and registered with? And usually if it doesn't make any bloody sense, they don't have them. So be very careful who you trust and make sure that if they are telling you to cut out particular food groups, probably don't coach with them, don't go with them. You don't need to cut out particular food groups. It is a balance. So when we talk about the topic of, and I've said this in previous podcasts, the topic of, okay, cool, excellent. If I can't do all these fad diets for fat loss, what can I do? Again, follow standard nutrition practice and protocol given to you by a professional for your specific requirements and needs. Now, I know that doesn't sound very easy, and it's because it's not. We need to figure that out for you, and just like you would go to somebody for a particular health condition or some sort of issue that is literally, tailored to you. That's why you go to a GP for a health issue. You don't just go onto the internet and Google doctor. You're never going to find the right answers there. You need to find a professional who's going to be able to help you out. And that's why you invest in sports nutritionists or simply look for some information that is available from very reliable sources. I definitely recommend Sports Nutrition Australia as a fantastic association. And also, Dietetics Australia as well. There are a lot of, larger bodies where you can find general pieces of information, and also the government guidelines are pretty good as well. Interestingly enough, they've come a really long way with general recommendations, but obviously they can't tell you what your individual calorie intake is because it differs per person depending on their goals. So they can't just tell the whole world to eat a certain amount of calories. There is a daily average intake for adults recommended, but again, it's very general. It's not dependent on, all of the factors in play. It's based on basically an average that they've found due to a number of different studies they've done in things like energy expenditure and things like, their essential nutrients that we've studied over decades. Okay, so moving right along from that. So next topic I'm going to talk about is intermittent fasting. People want to know whether or not intermittent fasting is any more beneficial for fat burning than not, and the answer is no. There is no reason why you should be doing intermittent fasting. I'm probably going to rub a lot of people up the wrong way. There are going to be those fitness influencers on the internet right now who are literally grinding their teeth. And I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Please stop doing it. Please stop fasting. You don't need to. I'll explain something to you. When you sleep, right, when you go to sleep, you've had your dinner and you lie down to rest, your body, while you're sleeping, you can't be eating unless you literally do that, unless you sleepwalk and you eat. Well, that's probably, you need to see someone about that. But you're not eating while you sleep. We're going to assume that. We don't eat while we sleep. We don't need to eat while we sleep. We're sleeping. So there's a reason why we call breakfast break fast. Break fast. When you sleep, you naturally are fasting, right? This is not purposeful. You just do. We as human beings, while we sleep, we don't eat. Okay? Not many animals on the planet that do eat while they sleep. I wish I could sometimes, but you don't sleep while you eat. So breakfast is breaking the fast. Now, when we get up in the day and we start expending energy, we start using energy, sure, we might use some of our fat stores, but as we start to eat calories as the day goes on, we are putting calories in. We're using calories and then we're expending calories as well. Now, if you look at a 24-hour period, if you were to not consume food in this window here, but consume food in this window, and it's the same amount of calories that you're eating in this window as you would in this window, it's still the same amount of calories. Basically, if your calorie intake is 2,000 calories or 2,200 calories, it doesn't really matter for the day. It doesn't matter if you consume it in a 4-hour window or a 12-hour window or a 10-hour window, that's how many calories you've consumed from the moment you've been awake to the moment you've gone to sleep. Now, if you shorten that window, there's no advantage. There's no advantage to fasting through that window. It doesn't force your body to burn more body fat. I mean, you might in that window, sure, but as soon as you start eating food again, the body's either going to store body fat or use the energy as basically caloric energy that you can use and burn, right? There's no science, there's actually no solid science to prove that intermittent fasting or prolonging your breakfast is going to advantage your fat loss goals, because you still have the same 24-hour window. It's maths. It's just maths. Now, if you want to create that calorie deficit, let's say, all right, well, hold on, Mariah. I'm not eating for 3 or 4 hours, which means I'm going to eat less calories in this window. Sure, let's work on that principle. Your 2,000 calorie intake that you were consuming across this when you were awake to when you're asleep window. Let's say you went, well, I'm not going to be as hungry if I delay my food and I fast a little bit longer. So I'm going to be eating, let's say you might eat 1,700 calories. The best part of this is that you can still do that. You can just start eating your calories in the morning when you're meant to, or when you wake up and start using energy, and spread the calorie intake across the day. And it's been proven, again, through sports nutrition studies, that 3 main meals and at least 1 snack is incredibly beneficial for things like regulating your hormones, your metabolism, for muscle protein synthesis, you name it, the 3 main meals and the 1 snack. So none of this big meal bullshit, none of this only 1 meal a day, none of this I'm going to try and starve myself until I'm so hungry that I go into that keto state. So where basically your body actually is more inclined to use body fat stores to while you're sleeping. You actually do burn calories, and you will, yes, use some body fat whilst you sleep. That's a natural state of ketosis. So ketosis occurs whilst you're sleeping. Now, as human beings, we actually don't need to force ketosis, okay? There's no need for it. Forcing ketosis makes absolutely no sense. It gives you bad breath. There's a number of things that happen in that process, but you don't need to force ketosis, because ketosis occurs naturally when you sleep. It's when it's meant to happen. So the other thing that points towards, intermittent fasting and the like is that, yes, maybe if we look back in hundreds of years, there would have been periods of time that we went without food, but yes, we might have used our body fat stores, but again, when we ate food again, guess what happened? Our body went, awesome, I'll have that. I need it because I need some body fat stores just in case I don't have food again. So it's like a conveyor belt. Food goes in and goes out, sure, as an energy source, but it wouldn't matter if you put it all in on one lot together and have a big gap on the conveyor belt. Eventually, the food's going to come back around again, and we're either going to store it as body fat or use it as energy. Okay? There's 2 things that can happen there with it. So we're much better off spreading that calorie intake across the day. And the amazing thing that happens with that is that you don't get overly hungry, right? So you don't have to go through that stupid hungry phase in the morning where you want to eat your left arm. And you can just spread it out. And if you're eating every 2 or 3 hours, great thing is that it actually helps you out with your appetite. Now, it doesn't actually advantage your fat loss goals eating regularly. Maybe on a small amount, they might have seen some studies to support that, but eating more regularly just means you don't end up getting that grumbly tummy, getting cranky, and then making dumb choices for your next meal where you might overeat, or where your hunger hormones are through the roof and you end up, eating continuously and not understanding when you're full. So, see you later, intermittent fasting. Don't even need you. And who wants to do it, honestly? I mean, if people say it makes them feel better, great, but that is literally a placebo effect. You are just convincing yourself you feel better from it. Next point, waist trainers. I'm going to try and breeze through these as quickly as possible. Waist trainers have been very much, something that is, tangible, something you can hold in your hands. And people seem to have this fascination with shit they can hold in their hands. Like, I bought this awesome supplement. I bought this waist trainer. It's going to fix all my problems. And I'm sure this came from a consumerist society, right? I bought the thing to fix my issues. I bought the physical thing to fix what's going on in here and to fix what's going on in here. The physical thing I can wrap myself in is going to fix my waist. Bullshit, okay? Waist trainers, if we look back at the days of corsets and the like, sure, it did help bring a woman's waist in a sense that it squished all of her organs into one place. But I'm going to tell you this, the only thing it does for body fat is just, nothing. It does nothing for body fat. There's no science to prove that a waist trainer is going to strip body fat off a certain area. That includes things like those stupid wraps and the zoom things that you put on yourself, the lasers and the melting there is nothing physical that you can do or apply to an area of body fat that will strip it off, right? There is nothing that you can do that will physically strip body fat off an area. And I'll say that again. There's nothing you can do physically to an area that will spot lose body fat from that area. Okay, body fat loss is something that happens inside our bodies as a result of not having enough energy available to use for our daily exercise and our activities and our daily energy expenditure, and our own body starts to metabolize and break down our own body fat on an internal level. The waist trainer doesn't do shit. It squishes all the organs together, but imagine if you were to do this to a piece of fruit. Like imagine if you wrapped a banana in a piece of string, right? All it's going to do is squish it all. There's still just as much banana there, now as there was before. And sometimes you'll see with waist trainers, specifically with sporting athletes like bodybuilders, that it might give them maybe a centimeter less in their waist, and this is not body fat, this is just going to squish their muscles into different directions, and it might even sometimes, in extreme cases, bring their rib cage in a little bit. There is some significant damage that you can do to internal organs and the like if you use waist trainers long term, and it also is really shitty for your breathing, so if anything, it's probably going to impede your performance. Things I will support is weight belts, and they're really good for supporting your core and your back for preventing injury in large lifts, but not for shrinking your waist. So no more waist trainers. See ya. Bye. Done with waist trainers. I keep kicking the air like I'm literally kicking these things out of my room. So I've covered keto. I've covered 1200 calorie diets. I've covered intermittent fasting, and I've covered waist trainers. Are there any that I've left out? Supplements, fat burners. Fat burners. Okay, let's talk about fat burners. Currently, there is nothing that we support as sports nutritionists, even as dietitians, for fat burning properties as a supplement. Okay, not significant, not enough. It's not enough to make an impact that you would like it to make. The calorie deficit that you need to be in and expending enough energy a day to use the body fat stores on your body, to force your body to use body fat as energy, is going to influence your fat loss exponentially, so much more than what a fat burner would. A fat burner, you're looking at less than 5%, if that, and it's going to have ingredients in it, things like pepper, things like there's things like L-carnitine, for example, that yes, they have seen to increase the uptake of lipids and things for fat burning, and energy use, but in talking about that, it is so minor. It's like a little grain of sand. It's not enough for us to even support that and say, do you know what? Yes, we back this. This is absolutely a supported supplement. We recommend fat burners. We don't. Caffeine will have a larger impact on your fat burning capabilities because you'll have an increased level of performance with caffeine on board for things like endurance training and resistance training as well. So if anything, caffeine, having a coffee, having some pre-workout in the morning will impact things like increased heart rate, which can then obviously increase your energy expenditure. But as I said, not on a level that you're looking for it to be the magic cure. Again, it's like this physical, tangible thing you think you can hold in your hands that's going to cure everything. So please stop spending your money on fat burners. There are some out there that do contain ingredients that increase your energy, like natural ingredients that increase your energy in small amounts, like vitamin B, etc., etc. But they're so small and they're so dosed on such a small level that they don't actually meet your daily requirement or even close to. So mostly a lot of these effects from these fat burners and these really, energy kicking supplements are going to be a placebo effect unless you're reaching a full daily intake from what they've given you for things like vitamin B and all the B complex. And even then, you should be getting it from your damn food. I'm sick of seeing people look at powder and go, this is the cure for everything, and I'm going to take all of this because this makes me feel amazing. Things like greens, powders, I will just lump them all in together. So the only sorts of supplements that we're going to see any sort of benefit for the specific sports performance facets is going to be things like fat loss and muscle gain. You're going to see a benefit from caffeine, creatine, and protein. Now, these are not going to be a quick fix fat loss tool. Caffeine is going to enhance sports performance from a perspective of increasing your heart rate for things like endurance training and increasing your performance capabilities. And there are studies to prove this. We support this as sports nutritionists, that caffeine, a particular dosage for each person depending on their body weight, etc. And this can be dosed prior to training. There's specific times for this as well. So caffeine can advantage your sports performance or increase heart rate, and can help with things like endurance training and resistance training. Now, we're also looking at creatine. Creatine will assist with muscle protein synthesis if it has been loaded correctly, and that means basically the dosage is being taken correctly for that first 7-day loading period. And then onwards from there, you need to continue the dosage at a slightly lower amount. And there are recommended guidelines for this as well. Now, this will assist with muscle protein synthesis, not necessarily on a level where it's going to be, some sort of, again, amazing cure to growing muscle or anything like that. It's not going to, make you into the Hulk. But there is enough evidence to support the supplementation of creatine to enhance muscle growth and the like. So, again, it's the percentage that these sports performance aids are going to assist is not on a scale of what people would like or expect from something that you take, from an oral perspective. So, and then obviously the third one being protein powder. Now, this is a supplement that is specific to its name. It's a supplement. So you can use protein powder to increase your protein intake to get to your daily intake that's recommended. It's not a fix though. There's people who drink protein shakes and say, like, will this make me lose body fat? No, it's a thing that is, imagine protein powder having a similar profile to, chicken breast or egg whites, in that it will help you reach your protein intake without having to eat meat for every single meal of the day. But we still do recommend eating meat, things like, getting a variety of chicken breast and red meat, etc., because there are going to be essential amino acids that are very beneficial in those meats. So those three are the only that we really support, okay, from a supplementation protocol perspective, for the purpose of sports performance, and like a performance aid, really. Now, the other one would be water. Obviously, it's not a supplement, it's free, but it's actually probably it is the first sports performance aid, and then carbohydrates being the second, that is readily available for us to just consume. So water, specifically if we can have enough electrolytes. Now, we can supplement electrolytes back in, so things like potassium, calcium, and the like, and sodium and sodium chloride. We can supplement that back in with things like electrolyte tablets, hydrolytes, etc., etc. We would like to see that people are trying to get as much of their electrolytes from their food as possible. So potassium from banana, and your sodium chloride from table salt, making sure it's iodized. And calcium will be in lots of different types of food types if we're getting plenty of food variety. So this is why we want to focus on the nutrition recommendations and guidelines that are being given to us, because there's a reason why they're given to us. So if we can get electrolytes from food, we'll see that we're adequately hydrated if we're drinking enough water for our body weight, which is the 0.5 litres or 500 mils per 10 kilos of body weight, or 3 to 4 litres standard as a minimum for anyone who's exercising daily, and kind of upwards for anyone who is particularly heavier, if they're carrying around a little bit more, and particularly active people as well can, you might see that, for example, labour intensive work might drink 5 to 6 litres of water. So without going off on a tangent about what type of water intake we want to have, water is a great performance aid, and obviously carbohydrates. But the supplementation on the supplementation protocol, as I said, caffeine, creatine, protein powder, it really is very simple. And that's what we support as sports nutritionists. And it is very much a national and a global standard. So, and the reason why, and you're probably thinking to yourself, shit, well, that means that all these supplements I keep buying are obsolete. I mean, if you're buying things like concentrated magnesium powder and they are saying that it's a sleep aid, it can, yes, assist with sleep, and it can, yes, assist with muscle cramps and the like, because magnesium is an electrolyte. So again, if we can get magnesium from our food, that's great. If we can't, and we do need to have that little bit extra to reach the daily intake, especially you're going to need higher levels of it if you are particularly active and engaging in resistance training, Sure, you can supplement it, but I do and always say about supplementation, really strongly recommend you read the supplement in the back, because you might find that you could get a cheaper version of it just being that ingredient by itself. You might be able to find a pharmacy grade magnesium that it's a high dose and that will help you get your intake in. The most common ones you see that people probably aren't consuming enough of is zinc, magnesium, and omega-3s. And it's because we don't generally in the Western diet eat many foods that are rich in magnesium and zinc. And they're doing a bit of research on selenium as well as an essential nutrient. So omega-3s, you can supplement that through fish oil, or you can supplement it through flax oil as well to get the extra omega-3s in, and unless you're eating enough walnuts and flax. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to doing another vlog for you soon. Make sure you like, subscribe, rate our podcast, subscribe to our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We've got everything. We've got a website as well, mariahjeanfit.com. Check out what we do, and make sure you tune in for the next podcast. Thanks a lot. Bye.